stop. You could literally be ruining your car. You're changing your tires, or you're changing your engine oil as per the manufacturer's instructions, or you're accelerating really hard. All these habits could literally be destroying your car step by step, one by one, day by day. So guess what? I'm going to share a list of 7 of those habits that you need to stop right now if you want to keep your car running forever. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
First thing you have to consider is, are you adhering to the extended oil service? A lot of manufacturers now are saying, hey, you can run your car up to 15, 18,000 kilometers, or maybe 12 or 15,000 miles and think it's all good. Unfortunately, a lot of these manufacturers have it programmed into their systems. So you have this maintenance tender, the service minder that tells you, bing, it's so many miles, your car's ready to go. It's not a fancy system. It uses an algorithm, but at the end of the day, it's mostly based on miles and a little bit of use and how hard you're using the vehicle. If you're following that to the T, what the problem is, you're probably extending your oil services way too long. Open up your car and go into the infamous glove box. And usually in here, you'll find, other than a bunch of junk, you'll find the owner's manual right in there. And the owner's manual will tell you some information. And also, when you look under the hood of your vehicle here, you'll notice, okay, you can check your dipstick, you can check your oil daily on that, but you should also be looking here. And notice, they'll actually refer the owner's manual right there under this cap, which is where you typically fill your oil right there. If you don't get the service tender, then you look under here and you're wondering, well, what's the condition of the oil? Then you look here and it says refer to the owner's manual. Then you go to the owner's manual and it tells you how many kilometers, maybe 18,000, 15,000 kilometers, which is clearly too long. Now, it's not like the old days where you need to do 3,000 mile oil services. I mean, that was back in the day when they used a crappier grade of oil. They didn't have oil quality that they have today with synthetic that are meant to hold up a lot longer. But that doesn't totally eliminate the sludge. Yes, it holds up under the higher temperatures for a lot better and a lot longer, gives you the protection, but the sludge factor is still there and a lot of that contaminants still builds in the engine. The problem is a lot of the engines nowadays aren't based just on the lubrication factor. No, for example, a lot of vehicles now, variable valve timing, they have pumps, lines, and if you have dirty oil, the variable valve timing, which alters the way that engine runs at low RPM, it readjusts timing as you accelerate and raise the RPMs. If you're not changing the oil, you could impact the way your vehicle actually runs, and not just the wear and tear of the insides of the engine. It also has impacts on turbos. Turbos use oil to lubricate the bearings. If you have bad oil, you can plug off the bearings that start to wear, and of course, you can blow a turbo seal, and that results in lots of expensive repairs. So the constant neglect of your oil and going to the full extent of the oil services is just a recipe for disaster. Then you ask yourself, why would the manufacturers tell me to change my oil at 18,000 kilometers? Well, you think I'm smarter than the next person? No, I'm not smarter than a bunch of scientists and engineers, not at all. But a lot of those people are driven by the dollars, and they're driven by the motivation that if you extend your oil services, eventually after 4 or 5, 6 years, there's enough wear and tear on the engine and the system that you might see some issues down the road. Not only that, remember, a lot of these maintenance programs that you can get with these vehicles will do all the standard maintenance that your vehicle requires for the first 3 years or 5 years. You buy those programs and they know that, and a lot of people sign up for that, or at the very least, they include it and say you get all this free maintenance servicing. It's all marketing shbag. It's nonsense. It's noise, and it's just garbage. And at the end of the day, it's all there just to bring you in the door to say that you can drive this new Mercedes, all the maintenance covered for the first 5 years or first 3 years, and people are Jojo like the circus boy, all excited that they can buy this Mercedes and not have to worry about maintenance. That's why they extend the service intervals out, so that they're not on the hook for doing an oil change every 5,000 or 8,000 miles. They don't want to do that. So instead, they extend out the service intervals, and it won't hurt the warranty. You won't destroy the car within the first 2 or 3 years, but you might after 5 or 6 years. So that's why don't follow the oil service intervals, and you make sure you do it much more frequently. This vehicle's all-wheel drive. This one's all-wheel drive too. Mercedes-Benz here, as we see, is 4MATIC. That means this has all-wheel drive. So a lot of modern day vehicles now have electric transfer front to back. They have a small, essentially, transfer case, differential front and back, and those are basically what drives the wheels on both ends. And they're connected electronically or mechanically, depending on the system. But the problem is this. It's not uncommon to either wear a tire out or take a nail. If you get a screw or a nail in a tire, you can actually ruin this wheel. Or maybe you hit a curb and you slice the sidewall and you say, hey, I need to put a new tire in there. Problem is, with a modern day all-wheel drive systems, putting one tire is a recipe for sure disaster. You want to ruin the differential, you want to ruin transfer case, you want to ruin some of the electronics, you just want to ruin your vehicle. That's a great way to start. Don't do it. So if you have one tire that gets obliterated, maybe you can't get to the point of just plugging the nail or fixing the little plug, maybe the tire's wrecked altogether, you cannot just replace one wheel. Specifically, if you have two-wheel drive vehicle, you should at least do the matchup, because a lot of modern day vehicles or traction control systems, you need to do at least a pair. But when you're dealing with all-wheel drive vehicles, if you catastrophically fail a tire, if you're down to about 50 or 60% wear on the whole system, you need to replace all 4 of those tires. You want to keep your all-wheel drive system running accurately, optimally, and you don't want to ruin a transfer case or a rear differential. You definitely have to replace tires in a whole set. The next habit that a lot of people get into is not necessarily protecting their vehicle as much as they possibly should. Have you ever heard of the old syndrome, broken glass syndrome? That's essentially, you see a house that has a broken glass on it, then there's a feeling it's run down, right? It just gives this subliminal message that the house is run down. Same thing with a car. If you see a broken taillight, you see flat tires, it tells you it's run down and neglected, not looked after. And the same thing goes with having a vehicle that actually has a significant amount of rock chips. For example, so you see rock chips like this on the hood of a vehicle, or on the nose of a vehicle that has rock chips all over like this. You see them all over. You see little imperfections and blemishes all over the vehicle. So generally, people that I find that care more about their vehicle are generally going to do the things when they buy the vehicle brand new. Like we personally did to our vehicle, and we do it to every single one of our vehicles when we buy them new or even slightly used and they don't have any marks or blemishes on them yet. We do something like this. Now, it doesn't seem like the scenario that's going to make the vehicle last forever, but if you feel good about the vehicle because there's no chips and marks on it, then you're probably going to tend to take care of it in other ways, mechanically, take care of your maintenance. For example, I'll show you what I like to do to actually give me a good warm and fuzzy about my vehicles. Like this, you can see a line. You see a line right here, right there across the hood. You see it go across, and then you see the same line over here. It meets up with the fender line here. And as well, down on the rocker, we put some film on there as well, and it goes all the way up that line. And we put paint protection film on here. You can actually see the hard line right there. There's a definitive line. And we put paint protection film as well on the A-pillar, as well as the leading edge of the roof. I generally like to apply paint protection film on all my vehicles on the leading edge, because in places where we live, there's lots of rocks and gravel. There's lots of vehicles in front of you that spit up gravel, and that rocks hit the front of your vehicle, starts to pit the front end, and then in short order, in a few years, you all of a sudden have a few chips and rocks. And sure, while you can touch it up, it never looks the same unless you get it done professionally. So at the end of the day, it makes you feel better about owning your vehicle. Put a little paint protection film on it, wax it every year or two, and then you're gonna find that that vehicle looks amazing in 10 years, never mind 2 or 3 years, and you can keep the vehicle looking better, longer. It makes you feel better about owning the vehicle, and you'll be more inclined to take care of the little stuff mechanically and continue on with your services like your oil changes and all of that to make sure that you keep your vehicle running tip-top for years to come. The next failure mode that a lot of people just disregard, it is literally inadequate warm-up, cool down, and even idle time, for example. Now clearly, as we look around here, it is cold out here. It's about minus 25 degrees Celsius, very, very chilly. Yeah, you wonder, how do I stand out here so long? I don't know. So if it's cold for me, it's probably cold for the car too, and it definitely is. So let's look at a warm-up. Let's open this up, and we're gonna go put that in, hit the go button. There we are. You'll notice it's idling fairly high right now because it's trying to heat up the catalytic converter, and the vehicle's not totally warmed up. Although I had it running about an hour ago, it looks like it's somewhat warm, somewhat ready to go, but not entirely yet. But the key here is you don't want to leave this vehicle running too long, but you also don't want to zoom off and just throw it into gear and then disregard the proper warm-up time, because you need adequate warm-up time to keep the vehicle in good shape. Generally, while the vehicle's warming, it actually idles high typically. It also warms up the catalytic converter in doing so, and it ensures that you get enough oil and lubrication to the bottom end of the engine. If you basically start the car and go when it's minus 25 degrees Celsius out here, you're sure as fire guaranteed to wear a little bit extra internally on your engine. Your bottom end, your rod bearings, your cam lobes probably aren't properly lubricated, and especially important if you have non-synthetic oil. Yes, synthetic oil can really pick up the slack for a lot of behaviors and sloppiness in this regard, because it generally does lubricate fairly quickly. The oil pump does build up pressure right away, and it gets oil through the engine. But honestly, 10 seconds or 5 seconds rarely is enough. So basically start the car up, let it idle for about a minute. When it's cold like this, I would at least let it warm up for about a minute, 30 seconds if the weather's good and the weather's warm outside, or even possibly start it and go. If the car's been warmed up already and it's already probably plus 20 degrees Celsius outside, then you could take a risk, put it in gear after you start it up and zoom away. But if it's cold out, you gotta give it time to warm up, at least a minute for sure. On the cool down, the other problem is a lot of people go zooming away. They drive, they're taking off from work and they're ready to get home, so they're racing down the freeway and they want to zoom up into the driveway. All of a sudden they get home and they got this urgency just to turn it off. Well, normally most engines can tolerate that, but a lot of vehicles these days are turbocharged. Like this one here has a turbocharged 2-liter engine. And after you run it hard, that turbo gets really hot because it's spinning at a higher velocity. It often is injecting air pressure back into the intake manifold to produce more power because people are hustling on the freeway. And in doing so, that usually means you're taking a toll. The turbo's heating up really, really hot. So if you turn the car off right away, the turbo starts to spin down, but you don't have the circulation. The oil's not circulating. The coolant pump may or may not be circulating depending on the vehicle. And so likely you're going to take a toll on the turbocharger itself. So people that generally run hard, turn it off right away, be careful. Turbos, you could blow them in a couple of short years. So you always hear those people, oh, I blew 2 turbos on my BMW. Maybe you weren't taking care of it. I'd have to ask that question. That'd be the first question I would be asking is, how much cool down time and warm up time did you give this vehicle? You could impose some significant damage over long term. Rarely will you see that right away. This will emit itself in a few short years. And again, cool down time, idle time, and you should be good to go. So another potential failure is actually you're ready to leave and punching your vehicle into reverse and then quickly driving off in forward. So it's that transition from forward to reverse that's likely going to cause some problems for your vehicle in the long run. Transmissions can cost $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 if you had needed one rebuilt or replaced. And especially if you're dealing with a lot of these expensive import vehicles, you can expect even more. What about dual clutch gearboxes? But what we're talking about mainly are vehicles like this, the torque converter automatic transmissions, like you find in this C-Class Mercedes-Benz. And let me demonstrate how you want to actually drive so you don't impose damage on your transmission over the long haul. I've seen people literally going backwards really quickly and then throw it in drive and then slingshot ahead, and that all that does is impose extra wear and tear on your transmission. No need to do that. Remember, if that fails prematurely, you're likely going to quickly end the life of your vehicle. So in this car here, you'll notice, you could see right here, there it's parked right now, and as you see the gear shift down here. So with this vehicle, I need to go up to reverse and then drive. So I'm going to toggle it up. You'll notice it's in reverse, okay? And then I'll show you as I toggle to drive as we back out. So here we go, everybody. We're going to back out. We're backing out. Here we are. So now, okay. Now I let it sit for a moment, then I go. Let the vehicle stabilize, settle, and then you set off. And now you're good to go. So you can actually feel the torque converter engage, disengage. You can actually feel that vehicle shift gears easily, comfortably, and not in a position where you're going to wreak havoc on the vehicle. As you can see right now, we're in D3, so the vehicle is clearly in drive. Another fault that I actually find a lot of people do, and I look over and I see on their dashboard, they see this nice little glowing yellow, glowing amber light that has this little engine symbol. And that's called a check engine light. Now, it could mean a whole host of issues from things that aren't that significant. For example, usually you have an oxygen sensor. There's a sensor to detect your oxygen and your fuel mixture coming out of the engine, then going through the catalytic converter, and then they'll sense it again to see how much drop you have across the catalytic converter. It's always monitoring the mixture and how well it's being filtered. You could have check engine lights for mass airflow, for misfires. You might have spark plugs or coil problems, and a rough run can actually result in high emissions, and you could potentially burn out catalytic converter if you have a misfire and you let it go on undiagnosed for too long. Hundreds of sensors in these vehicles that are all grossly monitored how well that vehicle's running, and neglecting your check engine light can literally lead you in a world of hurt. For example, right here, this truck, let's take a quick look. We currently have a check engine light, and I'll show you how you can quickly diagnose that, but definitely don't want to ignore it. So that's an example of a check engine light. You definitely don't want to ignore that for too long. You better at least scan it and understand what you're dealing with, because you could have a vehicle that's deteriorating before your very eyes. So we plug that in down here in this truck. It actually happens to be right below the steering wheel, and in most cases it's usually somewhere down over here or underneath the steering wheel. Somewhere in this area you'll find your plug-in port. It's called the OBD2 port right there, and you can plug that in. Now with this, we actually have the code reader right here, and it's currently scanning this for codes. So what is it saying? We have a P0135. That's an O2 heater sensor. So that's an oxygen sensor, and it's right bank upstream unit. That likely has a bad wiring, bad connection, or even possibly a bad sensor itself. So you definitely want to get that looked at and dealt with as soon as possible. So neglecting a check engine light can lead to a lot of issues. And if it's not catastrophic or doesn't even deteriorate the engine in any way, at the very least it runs less economically. And check oxygen sensors, for example, can contribute to heavy fuel consumption, rough running, maybe a rough start, tough to run, and just generally not operating in the way it was designed to. So definitely want to not ignore your check engine light. If you care at all about your vehicle, get it sorted out right away. There's another easy one too that some people get away with. It's rarely have I ever gotten away with this one, but let me show you. Right here is a very common issue with a lot of check engine lights. A lot of times you just have to check your fuel filler cap, and that's often one of the major contributors for repetitive check engine lights that seem to come and go, and they result in emissions issues and emissions type faults. That there can be one of your culprits. Fluid levels. You don't want too much, you don't want too little. Let's talk about that. So starting at the back of the vehicle, you usually have a rear differential in there. Most vehicles that are rear drive or all-wheel drive will have a rear differential of some sort. It will carry a higher viscosity of gear type oil. You probably can't overfill it in most cases because you can only fill it. There's usually a drain hole or a check hole on the side of it that you can pull a plug out and you can check it. And usually if there's enough oil on your finger, you've probably got it up high enough. Problem is, if you have a weep or a leak or a seal problem, you could end up leaking that gear oil out of there. If you do, and you start to get howling noise at the back, that's bad. That's really bad, because that can end up costing you thousands of dollars. So make sure you check the fluid level from time to time at the back differential. Then up at the front, a lot of vehicles have a transfer case. If they're 4x4, they might have a transfer case. Same story, there might be gear oil in there. And then transmission. A lot of vehicles either have a manual transmission, you'll find a standard gear oil or transmission, heavier weight of oil in there, or if it's an automatic transmission like this with a torque converter like this vehicle has, transmission fluid, it's usually red in color, and you can check that. In most cases, there's a dipstick that comes out of the top. A lot of vehicles now, like BMWs for example, tell you that is a maintenance free. I don't buy that for 1 second, but never flush that. Just make sure the fluid's topped up. Good mechanics that I know say that you can literally drain the oil and fill it back up if it's that hydraulic red fluid, but don't flush it. Flushing it will push some of the contaminants through the system, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, you have transmission issues like slipping and juddering. So don't flush it. If you want to top it up or drain it out and put new fresh, that's one thing, but even in a lot of cases, I would even run it the distance. I mean, you can run that for a significant amount of time, and clearly that's one fluid you want to check, whether it's through the bottom or definitely most vehicles, you'll have a dipstick at the top. The brake fluid, you want to make sure you have enough brake fluid. It has to be within the hash marks too. Check your master cylinder up here. It's usually up by the driver's side, brake master cylinder. If you're too low, top it up. You don't want to run that too low because then you don't have adequate braking capacity. You don't want to go too much because it could puke it out, vent it out the top, and brake fluid is corrosive. It can burn the paint off your car. Coolant, you never want to neglect. Antifreeze, you want to make sure that it's got the right balance, it's got the right level for minus 40 degrees Celsius, and that the level's always up. Check the hash marks on your expansion tank, and then you should be good. Different cars have different ways. Some vehicles like this, you undo the top and there's a bobber that bobs up and down, and then you'll know pretty quickly how much level you have. Again, don't open that up when the engine's hot typically. Check it when it's cold. There's also power steering pump. You can check that from time to time. If you get a buzzing noise, sometimes your power steering pump makes noise because it's got too low a fluid, or sometimes the pump is just worn out. Try to keep all your fluids within spec for level, quality, quantity, and definitely change it as needed. Otherwise, you will sustain issues down the road. That's a guaranteed. And with all of that said, be sure to check out right there how in fact to keep your car's engine running forever. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. We'll see you all real soon. Bye-bye.